Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live stream. So thanks again for joining, and hope everybody's safe and having a great week. And this week is going to be a different topic, I guess, in some regards. It's going to be, I'll apologize in advance, maybe a little bit of self promotion, and then I am going to talk about my game design course at CG Spectrum. But this week is really going to be a lot about like how do you learn game design and why do you learn game design, and when you're looking for a school or you're trying to learn on your own, like how you go about doing that. And I think it's a big challenge, in that there's lots of choices out there, right? There's lots of ways that you can learn how to be a game designer, and it's not clear, it's not easy, and whether you have any skills at all, whether you're currently, a working industry professional or just anything else, just in general, like it's just like, how do you get started? Like, where do you go for help? Where do you go to learn? And so I'm going to do my best today to kind of talk about these things, to talk about this stuff as unbiased as I can, and through my experience, but I'll admit I am biased. I have created a course on game design, and for those of you that haven't looked at the course, please go online. We actually just launched a new website. I'll actually put the URL here just in case. I think you all know where it is, but it should be cgspectrum.com. And go check out the new website and learn more about our courses there and my course. But that being said, like I said, I want today to sort of be an honest conversation, just about learning game design and the challenges that we face. And today's topic kind of came out of just so many people asking me over and over and over again, like, why CG Spectrum, or why should I be a game designer, or do I want to be a game designer versus an artist, versus do I want to be a system designer or a level designer, or all these different things, and like just and where to get started, and the types of things that you need to learn, and the challenges in it, and whether you're new, or whether even a lot of my existing students, and a lot of people in our current program are still asking the same questions, because it's difficult to know what is the right place to get started, right? And so, I hope today that you guys can learn a little bit about that, can kind of try to figure out, what's right for you, and if you're interested in learning game design, whether you're already, an existing game designer, whether you're still in high school, whether you're in college, whether you're thinking of going to college, whether you are a working professional and you just are interested in maybe becoming a game designer, and you want something you can do, and you want to learn on the side, learn nights and weekends, and then, so that you can retrain, and go get a job in game design. There's lots of factors to consider, and I can't cover every scenario and everything today, but I want to kind of just go slow and talk through these things. And again, I encourage you, those of you that are online, please ask some questions. Please, don't be shy, and I'll do my best to kind of guide you. I know that this channel often has a lot of artists in it, or people with art skills, and so I'll try to kind of address some of those things. And we've covered, if you are not aware of some of my previous live streams, we have covered kind of in depth in the past about what the job of game designer is, and the skill sets needed to be a game designer, and things like that. So I'm not going to go back over that really in depth. But I will kind of touch on some of that stuff and why it's sort of important for you to know and to kind of understand, right? And so, anyways, let's kind of dive in a little bit, and hopefully, as more people join us, they'll have more questions, and can help us kind of figure out, where everybody, is questioning of where to go, and kind of what to do. Now, one of the challenges I think, that's really, really, really important to understand in being a game designer, and in studying game design, specifically, is that it's just so multidisciplinary. And so you just have to know a lot about a lot, and so I consider myself what's called a polymath. And that's, well, it sounds like a weird word, and is kind of strange. Is just somebody who likes to know and studies a lot about everything, right? It's somebody that likes to study, about stuff that's very multidisciplinary. And so it's not that I just want to learn about game design, even though that's my primary interest in my life. I'm studying chemistry, or I'm studying biology, or I study, cars, or I study, other types of topics that on the surface may have nothing to do with game design whatsoever. And then, and I figure out how, in many cases, to apply that knowledge, into my life, as a game designer, right? And so that's something that's, I think, important as a game designer, is that you need to have, the will, or the interest in learning, and just learning in general, because it's going to be a lifelong pursuit. And in learning, it's not just about learning to be better at our craft. Our craft as game designers is critical. It could probably take you a lifetime to learn and master just in and of itself. But it's not just about learning the crafts of game design and how to make it fun, or all the different subdisciplines and things like that within it. But it is about wanting to learn, how to be a better game designer, and understanding that craft. But it's also about learning, the topics and stuff that we need to learn for many of the subjects, that we do in game design. Now, not every game or not everything has topics that it needs to know. But to give you some examples of things that I've learned over the years that have nothing to do with game design. For example, when I was working on Rainbow Six Vegas, if you look at my bookshelf, I literally have, hundreds of books on military and tactics and things like that. And, I was studying in depth, just all sorts of stuff from military uniforms to weapons, to, the audio of, like, how do special forces soldiers talk to each other? What are their hand signals, and things like that. So if you look in the game, there's a lot of authenticity that's very subtle. So even as the guys are calling out to each other and they're signaling and they're doing things like this and stuff, a lot of that's very, very real, and so it helps immerse a player more, in a world. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, like, design challenges. It's not just about, like, how do I make you jump better, or fight better, or how do I make the level more interesting or fun? That's a huge challenge in and of itself that we're going to talk about. But as a game designer, you're just constantly having to learn new things, and new genres of games and new types of things. And so in game design itself, the amount of learning that needs to be done is tremendous. And so if you don't like school, if you're not interested in learning, you need to kind of maybe question yourself and understand if this is really right for you, because it really is. Game design really is something that is going to be a lifelong pursuit. I've been designing games now for 30 years, and I still don't feel like I know everything. I'm not even close to knowing everything, because there's still so many genres of games that I've never worked on, sports and racing and things like that, and they have their own set of rules, right? And as a craft and as an industry, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're constantly learning new things, and evolving, and one big competitor might come out with a set of features, or even one feature that just, like, turns the industry upside down, or really changes things a lot. Like Apex Legends, which came out last year, had a ping system in it, for communicating and allowing people to communicate together. And that one system dramatically, improved the game and changed a lot of it. Look at the last God of War game on the PlayStation 4. The camera system, if you've never played that, is incredible. The camera is a one-shot, smooth camera system that follows the player around and never cuts. And that was a game changer for me. Like, it really opened my eyes to what, new things, can be done just, in cameras. And so we're always going to keep evolving. It's a little different than, say, movies or films. Not to say that those haven't evolved tremendously the last 20 years either, but I think game design, very much has a lot of those same issues, a lot of those same things going on, within it that, just like in movies where they're advancing techniques in cinematography, or they're advancing techniques in, they're advancing techniques, say, in like the way they're using cameras, or even going to new technologies like 4K or 3D, stuff like that. All those things advance just how we've been able to shoot a movie, and games, is kind of no different, right? And so the problem in learning game design is that there's already so much, just in my opinion, to learn about and just being a game designer, that you struggle in that a lot of people fall in the trap of that they feel like they have to know everything. That they want to be able to, as a game designer, be able to do everything themselves. They want to be able to, come up with an idea, implement that idea fully, and literally build a game all by themselves, and like a game jam type scenario, whether it's, very quickly, or whether it's just me in my garage or my office, and I'm just going to sit and I'm going to spend a year or two or however long it is to crank out, a game by ourselves. But really, for most people, games are a team effort. And especially, big AAA games, could have thousands of people on them. And so, so even learning soft skills can be really important. If if you're going to get into and want to make, big AAA games, your soft skills as a game designer are often just as important as your hard skills, and so learning how to deal with politics, learning how to deal with communication, and stuff like that, is really important. And so you do need to be, kind of aware of that. And so, there's a lot of challenges, in the in how game design, and how the multidisciplinary side of it, is a challenge, because our interests or our needs sometimes, revolve around, art and programming and audio and writing and these other areas, which are all related to game design, and they're all really good to know. But as a game designer, that's not the core skills of who and what we are, unless we're really, going to try and make a game all by ourselves, right? And so that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're really talking about how do you become a game designer on a big AAA game? How do you become a game designer, on a real team? And that could be indie or AAA, but where you're working with a group of people, in a professional environment, and that's a very different thing than working by yourself, right? And so we also struggle from, we have a lot of different genres we have to know, our tools and our techniques, and the game engines and things like that are constantly changing. We suffer from a lack of industry standards, and that every company is different. And in fact, I would argue that quite often within one company, the engines, the tools, the pipelines, the processes, and all that could change from project to project, from team to team. There's just no standards. And so as soon as you get to know one thing, as soon as you get to know, what's there, it just seems to, it does seem to break. Right. So, and then when you're trying to learn, it's also kind of like, how do you know what to learn, right? And if you're trying to do it by yourself, you're not going to a school or something like that. Just even knowing, what stuff to learn, can be a big challenge. And so that's tricky in that, you can go to Udemy, you can go to like lots of great sites, and you can find lots of stuff, but is that the right thing for you to really know, right now? And then the other problem with learning is whether you're going to, study at a school, with a lot of schools, not all, but with a lot of schools, quite often a lot of the faculty, if not all the faculty, is not necessarily experienced game developers, right? And so that's something that you have to sort of be aware of, and so and the same thing can go if you're using an online resource, whether that or a book or anything else, like, is that person even qualified, right? And so you start adding all those factors together, and it makes it really hard. So let's dive in a little deeper. This was just kind of the high level summary, for what we're going to kind of talk about today. And, let's kind of just dive in here a little bit. Excuse me. So when we talk about multidisciplinary, when it comes to game design, one of the challenges, that we have is just that, within game design itself, in the end, my belief is that a game designer's job is really about fun, and we're really about the user experience, and we're all about how do we make this really great experience for users to get into and enjoy, and that can be a very difficult thing because not all users are the same, and stuff, and so in every genre of game, which we'll talk about here in a minute, all have different rules. And so it's kind of like each one's like almost learning a different foreign language, where some of them have similar foundations, some of them have stuff that's kind of related, and but the nuances of it and the foundations for what it is do vary quite a bit. And so as a game designer, it's challenging in that you need to learn first, about game systems design. And game system design is really that second to second, like, how do I run? How do I jump? How do I shoot? Do I pick up the gun and I'm holding it this way? Am I aiming it this way? Is it down? How am I doing it? Like every even weapon has its nuances about, does it recoil, very quickly? Does it, does it spray, this way when it's going? And like, the system design that you're doing and how systems are designed, is a big challenge. And even in my current students, it's been hard to get them to really truly understand like how complicated, one thing can be, right? It can sound like combat is a good example where they'll say like, oh, it's just, the player just presses a button and it shoots the gun fires a bullet and it does some damage, and that's all I need to design, for a first person shooter, when in reality, there's hundreds of systems, there's and stuff, and so, but that game design, that system designer, and starting with that may not necessarily be the job you get. So if you're kind of coming fresh out of college and you're getting your first job in the industry, you may or may not be able to get a job as a system designer. But whatever job or internship or whatever you're going to get, the foundation for what you do is all based in system design. And so think of system design as kind of like learning how to draw, right? Learning how do you pick up a pencil if you want to be an artist, and how do you pick up a pencil and learn how just to draw, something that's has the right shape, has the right form, size, scale, the scaling and those kinds of things, right? And then you got to learn how to like color it. What's the color theory, and which colors work together, which colors complement each other, it's that kind of stuff, right? So this game system design is kind of that equivalent in that you're learning all these basics and these foundations, but that just that one thing, right? Just system design alone, again, for every genre, for everything is totally different, and so that's where like even just learning and mastering this one thing, how to make a game fun, and designing the systems in it is already a tremendous amount of work and could take you many, many, many years to master. And I would argue that, even a lot of working professionals aren't necessarily great at that. And so that's one of those challenges, right? It's hard. And in all honesty, like we'll talk about this more in a minute, but I've looked at a lot of programs for a lot of schools, and their game system design course, even with 4-year school, some of them only have like one class in this, over 4 years, and it's like a 3-unit class. So they're doing like a tiny bit of homework, a tiny bit of lecture, and then they're kind of like, oh yeah, it's easy, right? Anybody can do this. When in actuality, it's extremely difficult, and way, way harder than people think. And then as a game designer, the next big area is kind of level design. How do you take those systems that you created and designed? How do you create those? Take those things that you built, and then how do you apply that into the world, right? Into that level, and whether that's on a planet or in a spaceship, inside, outside, in a real world or fantasy world or whatever it is. How do you take those game systems and apply them into the level design? And so as a game system designer, quite often you need to be a little bit more technical. Doesn't mean you have to be a programmer, doesn't mean you have to do that, but you often, to implement a lot of your things and stuff, you also need to be at least good at scripting or doing some basic stuff, but again, not critical. Same thing with level design. Like level design helps to be semi-technical and have a little bit of technical skill, but it's also more art-based, usually, depending on the kind of game you're trying to make. And so these two alone are something that you could easily spend several years, trying to master. These are not easy jobs. These are not things, that are trivial to learn. And then there's all these like subspecialties, right? And so if you're doing quest design, and writing and being a game writer, or interface design, for games, or understanding psychology and the relevance, because what we do is actually just as much a science as it is an art. And I think that's the problem with a lot of game companies, even in a lot of places, is that we often think that it's more art form versus science. And what does that mean? Is that we're focused on how do we kind of use our gut, use our head to make things good, but we're not always understanding there's science there. So for example, in psychology, understanding how memory theory works, understanding how reinforcement schedules work, understanding what scares us, what makes us happy, what makes us sad, that type of stuff in psychology is really important. And this is kind of part of and a subset of game system design and level design. And so psychology and studying psychology and understanding psychology is really important. But like that could be a whole, you can study to be a psychologist, and you can go to, you could go to school for 4 years just to learn how to be a psychologist, right? So it's about learning the parts of it that you need, the aspects of it that you need. And again, this multidisciplinary thing of understanding that psychology is an important part of game design, and understanding game design, understanding people, understanding their human nature of these things is really important. And so that's just, again, another one of these subspecialties, right? And it requires the same amount of time and same amount of skills as really becoming a great interface designer, a great writer or quest designer. Each of these is almost, and quite often is its own job. So at a small company, maybe you wear a lot of hats and you're doing all these things together, but teams have these entire, jobs just for these, just each one of these skill sets can be in and of its own job. um, multiplayer design, learning how to design multiplayer, and that could be anything from like a Call of Duty type game to any type of multiplayer game could be seen this can have its own rules and its own challenges, whether you're doing a battle royale, a PC based thing, whether it's a co-op multiplayer, a massively multiplayer game, every type of multiplayer, which is a lot of subspecialties again, all have their own differences. And so just becoming an expert even in multiplayer design, you may not necessarily, so if you're doing multiplayer, you may not have a lot of writing or other types of skills needed there, but the skill sets you have and learning how to build these virtual worlds and getting people to play together well, and when you start adding people playing against each other, with each other, for each other and everything else, human nature takes over, and people are going to cheat, people are going to be toxic, people are going to have all this these problems, right? And so multiplayer is its own subspecialty, and then multiplayer and mobile is totally different, and works more turn-based versus in real time in a lot of games. And mobile game design in itself is its own subspecialty, and learning how to do user acquisition, learning how to do all the stuff in a mobile game is really, really hard as well. And then like free to play, doing premium versus freemium, premium free to play, like those types of models, those types of games are drastically different, right? And so that's something that's that you have to be aware of, right? And so my point about all this is that yes, you can try to focus on one of these, and you can't necessarily do all of these. And this is just in what I consider the category of game design. And the challenge, in that is that you kind of have to kind of figure out what you want to do, what you enjoy doing, what you're good at doing, and all that. But you have to realize that each of these can have its own set of jobs, and there may or may not be a lot of jobs out there. Like we all want to be a creative director. We all love being a writer, or say a lot of us do, and that doesn't necessarily mean, even myself, like I've written multiple books and stories and movies and TV shows and all sorts of stuff over my career, and yet I still don't think I could go get a job as a writer. Some of these are skills that take a long time to master, and then on top of that, you need to have the experience to be able to also work with them. So that's where it gets challenging. But the problem is then that if you get outside of just what I consider core game design, right, then you also have game development. And game development is huge, and could take, anybody lifetimes to learn. So game development, could include art, programming, audio. We talk about writing, but being a more hardcore writing, it could be the business, side of the games. There's all sorts of stuff needed on the production, side of making a game. So scheduling and, stuff like that. And depending on the kind of game you're making, there's also a lot of stuff like QA and other things that are also a big part of, of games, focus testing, usability testing, all these kinds of things. And so it really truly is impossible for one person to know everything, right? And that's why, when I teach game design, I focus on game design, and I don't have all this other stuff in there. And I find that a lot of schools do. And that was one of my frustrations, is that after looking at so many resumes and so many people failing over and over and over again, I felt like I needed to do something about it to try to help people, do better. So welcome, Big Globo, or I guess Big Glob of Goo. Sorry. Says, is it safe to say the bigger the studio, the more focused on the single or two disciplines? Yes, absolutely right. So as you get into a bigger and bigger team, you're definitely going to have a lot more specialization, right? So as a level designer or a quest designer or things like that, it's definitely quite a bit more challenging, for a lot of for people. And so yeah, you want to try to learn, if you're going to be on a small team, you want to try to learn how to specialize, right? And if you're going to be on a large team, if you're going to be on a small team, you want to learn, be much more of a generalist. If you're going to be on a large team, you're going to be much more focused in your skill sets. And so if you plan on building a game all by yourself, you're going to have to learn all of this, and there's an old saying of like, jack of all trades, master of none. And, and with game designers, that can be very true, very quickly, very easily, in that, it's very easy for us to, again, get defocused from game design, and really like suddenly, we have this natural inclination to want to know more. And that's part of us as humans and game designers, is that we're always curious. So we're like, oh, I want to learn how to be an artist, or I want to learn how to be, game programmer. I want to learn more and more and more. And I never discourage people from learning those things, but those things are definitely very tough to learn and become masters of all of them. And so the people I know that really are the true, multitaskers that try to be masters of all these things are really not good at any of them. And it's hard enough to be a good, just broad game designer, let alone, being somebody who's, also good at art, programming, audio, and all these other, disciplines, and so that's where you have to be very careful, is just knowing, what to focus on. And so, I know this is a bit long-winded, and what I'm trying to get at is to show you guys that, you have to be really, really careful, because the number one problem I see with a lot of schools out there, and there's no easy answers here. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. I'm not saying the other schools are right or wrong, but there's different approaches, right? There's different approaches to learning. And I see a significant number of these other universities that are trying to teach everything. They're teaching you to be a game designer, but they're also teaching you art, programming, and other stuff. And what I find is that, through my evaluations of a lot of these courses, that again, they're giving degrees in game design, and yet I've seen, courses that over even a 4-year program had 2 or 3 actual game design classes. And the rest was just like, 3D modeling and game programming and lots of random stuff in random areas. And the people are just spread so thin that they can't really build anything. They can't really do anything. They're not hireable, right? And so, so I think as a game designer, you really have to take a step back and really, no matter how or where or what you're studying, whether you're studying by yourself online, and just using books and YouTube or whatever, Udemy or other sources, which are all great, but they're not necessarily going to teach you the right things to know and when. And so one of the things that I want to try to kind of talk about is about when you really are getting into game design, knowing what to design and when to design it, and what to learn and when to learn it, are probably 2 of the most important skills in being a game designer. In the end, you kind of need to know all of it, or sometime, you kind of need to know all of it, but you really do need to kind of know like what to focus on, right? And what to do. And so, again, a lot of schools, especially 4-year schools and things like that, they teach just this real wide variety of stuff, right? And so, and we've already talked about some of these things like psychology, where it's like psychology is very useful for a game designer. However, there is a tremendous amount of psychology that is, in my opinion, very academic, and doesn't truly have a significant amount of influence on us as working game designers that is at a point that really kind of affects us. And so we have to be careful about that. A lot of them will be too theoretical, and then they'll get really hung up on the theory behind stuff, and like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And there's things like the prisoner's dilemma or other stuff, which is great to understand, at a high level, but you can easily get so caught up in it that it doesn't really help you, right? It isn't something that you can it's not something you can easily learn and apply, right? And that's the difference, is like, is the stuff that you're learning applicable? Is it truly applicable? But if you have no experience, how do you know that, right? And so that's one of the problems. And so again, whether you're learning game art or programming or audio or writing, even interface design, which interface design is in my opinion, for a lot of mobile games, makes or breaks it, right? I'm personally a bit of a control freak when it comes to my interface designs. I don't trust other people to design my interfaces, usually, or I do it, or I let them maybe do some of the grunt work while I oversee the high level vision of it. Because to me, especially in mobile games, but it's also true in some others, that the interface makes or breaks your product. It's how easy it is for your users to work with, and so you need to be careful there, right? And then you can also get into just all the aspects of game production, being a producer, a PM, project manager, product manager, getting into SQL databases, getting into running usability tests, focus tests. There's just all the QA side of things. And so even just a little bit outside of like core game design, there's just all these other things that all relate to us, right? They're all stuff that at some point we may have to adapt our design to do, right? And so you have to kind of understand what's important to you, right? And I think, any kind of school or subject, again, whether it can be online, it can be books, research reports, Googling articles, whatever it is, I'm not picking on, schools necessarily here, although some schools do tend to lean this way. But just academic theories in general, like, I can't tell you how many papers I've read or things I've seen that were written by a bunch of academics who had never ever worked on a game themselves, and they're sitting back trying to judge what we're doing, and then they offer up ideas of like, oh well, here's a better way to do it, right? Because I'm smart and I'm an academic and I've played a video game before, so I have an opinion. And so I'm going to write some big report about how broken the industry is, or how messed up it is, or any of these kinds of things, and so that's a challenge, in that I've seen so much stuff that was so theoretical that it just isn't applicable. It wasn't something that you could actually make, right? It wasn't something that that information was not something that would be something that you could like literally sit down today and design a game around it, right? And so that's where you have to be careful in that when you're learning, you got to learn the right things. You got to learn at the right time. You have to learn how to apply them. There's another saying that you'll hear a lot, I'm sure, in life, and that ideas are a dime a dozen, right? And and we do believe that in general as an industry. Like, ideas are generally a dime a dozen. Execution is everything. Like, getting your product out on time and on budget, that kind of stuff is way more important than just creating something, right? And so so you need to kind of understand which theories are practical. And so one of the things that I've tried really hard in my course to do is really explain things in simple, common, everyday English. And then try to not put things into these purposely highfalutin, kinds of language and stuff that people go like, oh, I don't get that at all. Like, that makes no sense. Like, or you read it or you study it and you're like, oh, that makes total sense. And then you get into actually do it and you're like, I'm lost. I don't know what to do, right? Because a lot of stuff might sound good on paper, but in the end, it's not that easy. right? And so that's just something that you need to sort of be aware of. The next problem that is, I think, one of the most prevalent problems for us as game designers is just that there's so much out there, like we talked about, in each genre of games. And so, like, first person and third person, even games have quite often very different sets of rules. How to design a first person shooter versus a third person shooter has very different rules. How to design a single player game versus a multiplayer game, in first person or third person, have very different rules, right? Even an esports game, while it may be multiplayer, has its own sets of rules, right? MMORPGs, which are probably one of the most, horrendously hard, difficult game genres to make, have a tremendous amount of different rules. And so you can't just assume that, like, oh, I can make a game here and and it's really simple, and then I'm just going to port it over to some platform, and it's going to work, and so these things are not just the genres, but whether I'm doing it for Xbox, whether I'm doing it for VR, whether I'm doing it on mobile, whatever. So the platform has a tremendous amount to do with it, and there's a lot of tricks we can do to make things work across all areas, and all genres. But you do need to be aware that each of these is kind of its own language. It's kind of its own thing. And if you, again, try to specialize in all of these, and stuff, you probably will fail. And so that's something that's really tricky. So hello, David. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, I can go. Yeah, sorry, this slide deck's a little bit tricky here. Let me share out this. That's a link to the slide deck, so hopefully you can also read it there. I think this slide's the hardest to read, and I apologize. The reason I was not doing it full screen was then my face tends to cover some of the stuff. But let's try full screen, and hopefully my ugly face isn't covering up too much of the text here for you guys. So, hi Megan, thanks for joining us. The game design diploma, it's difficult, it's a very difficult space to navigate, right? It's difficult to just kind of figure out, like, where do you get started? Like, how do you get started, and what am I supposed to learn? And it's overwhelming. And so whether you come study with me or go to a 4-year school or try to learn on your own or whatever, there's not a lot to there's not easy paths, right? And each path has its challenges, and I want to be even honest with, like, you guys. When I designed my course, I spent a long time, years really, of, like, interviewing students and talking to students as I was trying to hire them, and I was just finding very few people that were qualified, and that made it really hard, and it was very frustrating because I care about people. I care deeply about them, and so trying to see how to help the students was important to me, and that's why I've written a lot of books on game design. I've written lots of blog articles, and it's a challenge. And as a quick aside too, if you guys don't know, on LinkedIn as well, I have a blog, and I've written 30 or 40 articles up there on game design topics as well. So I do have some other topics there, about these various things, on psychology in games, stuff like that. But again, it's hard because, like, even I'll go out and look for a topic on game design, and yeah, the game of game design, exactly, or the game of learning game design. It's tricky, and, like, I'll go read articles, by people, and I'm kind of like scratching my head, like, that doesn't make any sense, like, it's not applicable, or doesn't work, or that's not my experience. Now, again, every team's a little different, every project's a little different, and it's just hard. It's hard to know where to get started. And so I'm just trying to kind of raise awareness of how I made decisions about how I was going to teach and why, and so that you guys can kind of understand that there was a tiny bit of method to my madness, a tiny bit of that's going on there, and so it's tricky, but when you look at all these genres and you look at all these things, again, they each just have very, very different sets of rules and skills, needed. And so there's just a lot to learn. And so some game designers that I know that are working professionals, I have friends that have been designing for many years, and they still struggle with their game design, because they may have one second here. They may have been working on one genre of games. Like one of my close friends has been doing first-person shooter design for about 20 years. And he's worked on some of the biggest first-person shooters in the industry. Phenomenally skilled, phenomenally good at what he's doing. But he tried to transition when he lost his job. His company went out of business. He tried to transition from first-person shooter design, into some other genres, and he tried to get jobs in other genres, and he failed. It took him like 2 years almost without a job, to finally find another job, because he didn't have the skill sets to go really work on like strategy games or other types of games, and he tried over and over and over again. And even though he was a great first-person shooter designer, he really failed there, and it was tricky. So, David, I don't see your request, but if anybody makes requests on the Google Docs, if it's not there, I'll make sure they get approved. So sorry if it's not there immediately. And so so that's some of the challenges. Now the next hard thing, that's I think one of the tougher things is that there's so many tools, right? And so tools are kind of in a couple different categories. You've got tools that are made to make games. You've got there's game engines. There's tools to make tools, and there's literally tools upon tools upon tools, kinds of things. And as game designers, there's even though Unreal and Unity have gotten significantly better, even though they are doing and improving daily, those game engines don't necessarily make a game, right? They give you the foundation for it, but you still usually need a set of tools or other stuff to actually build like a level correctly, or to do certain types of things. And so the game engine's like the start of it, but you need to make all that content. And so whether you are starting off in the very beginning and you're trying to write stuff, and you're trying to create documents and presentations and things like that, like those kinds of tools are pretty simple and pretty straightforward. But then as you get into like art production and and even as a game designer, we need to know how to like make some levels of art, even if it's doodle sketches, or we're taking clip art and making certain things, or we're taking some pre-made 3D models and we're trying to put something together. We need to understand some art tools. And then when we get into the game engines, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but Unity and Unreal and all these commercial and other engines, proprietary engines, everybody's got different technologies. And even within the same company, you can have multiple engines and multiple tool pipelines and things like that. And so, potentially every game, even if you're doing sequels, from one game to the next, the tool pipelines and the tools can change. In today's world, as of filming this, like there's the UE5 Unreal 4 engine from Epic, but they've already announced Unreal 5. And the Unreal 5 engine, is going to be made for, PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox and things like that. Well, those are months away, right? So Unreal 5 is coming out soon, like really soon, right? And so that's going to have a whole nother pipeline, a whole nother process, a whole nother way of working. And so from a game designer's perspective, how we work in Unreal 3 to how we worked on Unreal 4 now to how we're going to work in Unreal 5 in some days, weeks, or months from now, it's scary. Like, we have to keep relearning. And so a lot of what you need to learn if you're just getting into game design, if you're just getting into learning, and you know that it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4 year process for you to learn, the tool itself isn't the critical part. The tool is just a tool. The tool is going to change. And if you get in the game industry, and you've been in it as long as I have, I've literally worked on 40 or 50 different game engines, and from proprietary ones to, early versions in Unreal to, the very first versions of Unity, and lots of random ones that don't exist anymore, and they come and go, every generation. Dozens of different engines are constantly coming and going. And so what's important to learn right now is how to learn. It's important to learn the foundations, understand what a game engine does, but don't necessarily have to get into like the specifics of mastering every button and everything that way, shape, or form. It's like if you want to go out and be an artist and you want to do 3D modeling again, you might want to be the best 3D modeler in the world. But if you don't know how to sketch, if you don't know how to draw, if you don't know color theory, and you don't understand the technologies and you don't understand those things, then it doesn't matter how good you try to get at 3D modeling. If you don't understand those basics, if you don't understand those foundational stuff, you're never going to be a great 3D modeler. And so that's that kind of thing where game design is very similar. And I'm trying to make this analogy because I know a lot of you are artists. But learning the theories, learning the ideas, learning the concepts, and then in the end, the most important ones of those is fun. That to me outweighs learning a tool, right? Now, programming languages and stuff like C, C++, even C# or other things, those don't come and go as fast. But as a game designer, those aren't critical for you to know. Yes, it helps a lot if you know C#, Unreal Script, so some basic visual or basic scripting languages. But you do not need to know C or C++, to be a great game designer. And so that's where like some of the programming and those types of tools are icing on the cake. But you got to make that cake first, right? And you got to be good at understanding that thing. And again, those things don't change all that much, So it's you're understanding the foundations of like how a programming language works and how whether you're working in a visual or text-based coding or whatever, you're really again learning the foundations of stuff. Sorry, David, I don't see your request. So yeah, I don't see the request. So yeah, sorry guys, I'm not seeing I see the document. I have the document open in another window. And it's not and it is not let me open here. Oh, 1 second here. I just changed the permissions. I think I might have actually had the permissions wrong. So let me resend the link here one more time, and see if you guys can access this one. Yeah, I think that's allowing you there. Sorry about that, everybody. I didn't realize that I had it on it wasn't allowing viewers in. So my bad on that one. So now you guys should be able to access this. So enjoy. I hope that helps you a little bit. Okay. And then, talking about tools again, understand as a game designer, the tools that you have are are going to change from project to project. You know, the tools that we need to build a level, for example, in a first-person shooter are often very different than the tools that we need in an RTS, and you know, and stuff. And so we often have very proprietary tools. We have our game engines, and we work within the game engine, but then on top of that, we often write either a full proprietary tool that handles some aspect of the level design or the game design or something like that, or we might build that tool within, say, the Unreal editor or another editor. So it could be a plugin, it could be a standalone tool. You know, there's lots of ways that these tools again can work. But again, the tools are going to change from project to project and generation to generation, and so you have to understand the theories behind them. But let me give you an example of like a proprietary game design tool that a team might have. So when I was at Midway, we were originally using a custom proprietary engine, and then partway through that, we were building a Mortal Kombat fighting game, and then they decided to switch us over to the Unreal 3 engine. And they then switched our project from a Mortal Kombat game over to a game called TNA Wrestling and Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. And it was a game that came out. You can look it up on PlayStation 3, you know, back some years ago. And it was an okay game. It wasn't great, but we had a lot of struggles because we were using the Unreal 3 engine. But in a fighting game, one of the challenges there is the animation systems. And the problem on like a single character when you're fighting, right? And you have your basic idle of like maybe where you're standing, then you have like one animation is like punch. You know, another animation, you know, might be you know, a jab, and then you got this, and you have blocking, and you have grappling, and you have all these things. Well, somehow, somewhere, someone, you know, i.e. a game designer, a combat designer, has to set that all up really precisely. They have to know that like, okay, when the player presses this button sequence, you know, I'm going to start throwing a punch. That punch might take, you know, some number of frames of time, but partway through it, the opponent, whether it's an AI or another player, might have an interrupt phase where they can actually hit another button, which might block it, counter it, you know, do something or stop it or something like that. And so these poor designers, say poor, but I mean, these guys love their jobs, but it's a very specialized job. And these combat designers, you know, a single fighting game character could have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animations and moves, you know, and everything, because it has to be, you know, like might be the initial animation, then it might be the follow through animation, it might be the interrupted animation, and all these things. And so like we had to build this custom proprietary tool that allowed our guys to pull on every character and set up every animation like precisely. That tool took us 1 year to develop. It was not the simple thing that we just spent a few minutes working. It was literally a standalone thing that you launched as its own program that tied into Unreal. But that one tool was so complicated and so hard that it literally took a team of programmers a year just to make that one tool, right? So, and on the next project, we didn't use it. So the point is that like you need to understand like that theory of how an animation combat system works, and you know, and how they're going to throw punches and those things, but which button to press and how to press it and how to learn that tool was kind of irrelevant, because it didn't matter, you know, in that particular case, because again, you know, you learn it for that particular job, for that particular project, but inevitably you're probably going to learn a new tool for the next job. So David, let's see. I have a question about the tools for the project. What tools exist for create a fully detailed interactive GDD with links and media good to work and see? That's a hard question. You know, I've struggled, you know, throughout the years to find the best tools for writing GDDs. And what I've landed on now is Google Documents. And the reason I like Google Documents, one, is that it's always real time and it's always updated. And it allows for multiple people to work on the same document simultaneously. And where that has saved me more often than not is just making sure that everybody's on the same page. And I can't tell you how many times I've sent around a Word document and emailed it out and said like, here's version 1 of the Word document of this feature. And then, a week later I'll send out, well, here's version 2, implement this. And inevitably somebody doesn't see that email, doesn't remember the right document. Some programmer would pull up version 1 and implement that, and then, months later I look at it and go like, that's not what I designed. I remember I changed everything, and they're like, oh, I didn't see it. So communication sometimes is the most important thing to have, right? And so having all these other things in it can be really nice, and it's icing on the cake. But if people can't work together on it, and if people can't, if the tools to create those things and make sure that everybody's on the same page all the time don't exist right, then it's tough. And so while I've used Jira and a bunch of different tools within the Atlassian family and things, they do have other tools out there. I find that they are very proprietary. They're hard to access. They're a little hard to use, and they are usable, but they're not as good. I still find that the Google Documents is all I need, and so I can insert videos into it, i.e. YouTube videos. Unfortunately, I wish Google Docs did link to other stuff, meaning that I could insert other things more easily, i.e. not just YouTube videos, but I can insert links all day long. I can insert photos and pictures and things like that, in a wide variety of different ways. It's got its own little proprietary, even image editing, stuff. So I can put in charts and graphs, and that kind of stuff. And so I find that while it may not be perfect, it's good enough. And so that's why I've been using Google Docs. Now, the new Microsoft Word, I think they just changed the name of it. So I think it's now just called Office, or it used to be called like Office 365. So Microsoft's been changing dramatically. They went from the original Microsoft Office was a proprietary standalone set of tools that used to really be the best. But then Google came along and kind of leapfrogged them just in their ability to work, in a group environment, which changed everything for me. And then Office came along and tried to do Office 365, but it was always rough around the edges. It just never worked as well as Google Documents. And now I believe there's a new version of even Microsoft Office that they've now kind of remerged them, and they're trying to do more like Google Documents. So again, the tools will change, right? The tools, and you may go to a particular company that demands, like you may go to work at Microsoft and they may demand that you work in Office 365 or whatever the name of it is now versus Google Documents, right? And so you might have a personal preference on the tools that you use. You might have a personal preference in what the types of tools that you use, the game engine that you use, whatever. But ultimately the job, the company, and the team ultimately will dictate what you have to use, right? And that's the challenge with a lot of this stuff, is that the tools, again, will shift constantly. And so that's why in my course, I try to teach a wide variety of stuff, and I try to get you experience in 2, 3, or 4 different game engines. I try to show you different tools. I try to show you different techniques, and try to use, a real wide variety of stuff, so that you understand the theories of how a lot of things work. So when you jump into a new tool, whether it's just a new revision of the same tool, I mean, you could be jumping from Unreal 3 to 4 to 5, or even just, especially like Unity and some of the game engines, you can go from, version 2.1 to 2.12 to 2.122 and whatever, and like everything can suddenly change. Like they'll update stuff all the time, and sometimes things work one way one day and they change it and it works a different way the next day. And so you have to learn how to think. You have to learn how to adapt. You have to learn you're just going to have to go Google something. You're either going to have to work with some teammates to figure out how to do it, or you got to go figure it out. But that's just part of being a game designer, that these tools are going to change all the time. But if you don't understand the theories and concepts of how the tools work, or how to write a game design document, or things like that, it can be really tricky. And so that's where, as a game designer, it's good for you to get a lot of exposure to a lot of things, and that's across all, everything. So the genres of games, like I think one of the few game designers that's actually shipped games on almost every genre except for sports and racing. I think I've pretty much shipped a game in every genre, and I've done a little bit of sports. I did some cricket games, which, if you consider that a sport, sorry to offend you if you're from India or or the UK. And cricket's not exactly a sport, but yeah, I've done a little bit of some stuff like cricket. I've done some fighting games, wrestling games, things like that are sportish, whatever. I've done racing in the sense of like, some open world, car-based things and stuff like that. But again, I've purposely tried to work on as many genres as I can so that I understand the rules of those. And that same concept is applying in tools, right? That same concept is like, okay, do I understand the basics for it? And I know that every single time I start a new project, and if not all the way throughout an entire project, I'm going to constantly keep learning something new. I'm going to have to constantly keep going and asking myself, like, is this the best way I can do it? Like, is there a better way? Is there a better tool? But just because the tool is better for me does not mean that tool or that engine or that technique or whatever is better for my team, right? And so you always have to ask yourself that, and it's hard. Like, even an example today, like, in my day job, I'm building one of the largest esports arenas right now that's in the world. And that's what I do during the day, when I'm not teaching. And, and my team's very not tech savvy. I'm the only guy that's really a tech guy within my team. They're all a bunch of sports guys because we're building a big sports park and an esports arena that's within it. And so I've been evaluating some tools to do what's called CRM, customer relations management. I need to track all of our deals. I need to track all of our people. And there's a tool called Monday.com. It's actually, I think the website's just Monday.com. And it can do a lot of different things, but it's a relational database. And I built up a full prototype in it. I really, really like Monday.com. It did everything I needed it to do. And I showed it to my team, and they just scratched their head and they went, like, I don't want to learn something new. And like, they barely can use Google Documents, let alone trying to learn something new. And in the end, I spent all day today basically building as close of an equivalent as I could within a Google spreadsheet. And so now I have a Google spreadsheet with all these drop downs, and it's not as relational. It's not as good as Monday.com is. I spend a lot of time customizing it, but I did that because it's what my team wanted, right? It's what they needed. And so it can be frustrating that often the best tool that we need for those jobs is not always the right tool or what we're even going to be allowed to do from the team. And I've had similar things where, like, I found incredible tools to do things that were great in my game design life, and then we looked at the cost and we went, and a good example of that is if you guys are aware, I'm not actually sure if they're still in business. There was a thing called the Alien Brain, which was around for a long time, and I think they got bought. And so, to be honest, I wish I remember. But it was a tool kind of like Perforce or other things for doing, for basically tracking all of your assets and checking them in and out and stuff. And at the time, when I worked at Microsoft, it was just an incredible tool. Like, it was just way ahead of its time. It had all sorts of stuff for asset management. And, and so we were trying to convince Microsoft to switch over to this tool to use it. And we did all the evaluations. We did everything else there. And it was just going to be a huge win for the design team as well as the entire, game team. And then we finally got a quote for it. And it was like $2 million. And we went, and like, okay, I guess we're not using that, and we went on to the next tool. And we ended up building some custom proprietary stuff, to do similar things. And we kind of hacked it together. But this was one of our problems at Microsoft specifically, is we weren't allowed to use Perforce and some of the other tools because we had our own, Microsoft had its own tool at the time for doing that stuff. And it was not very good, and it did not work for games, but we were stuck because that was what we owned and that's what we had as Microsoft, and we got caught between a rock and a hard place of what we were allowed to do and not allowed to do. And that one tool was just crushing our game team and was killing our design team specifically. But again, it just, sometimes you get stuck, right? And so you have to learn, how do I adapt? How do I change these things? And so again, as a student, as you're trying to learn these things, don't get so caught up in like, you got to know all this stuff. It's tough and it's tempting that you want to learn everything. You want to know everything, but focus and just learn the concepts of learning, learn how to learn how to adapt, learn how to think, right? And that's really what you're going to be learning, initially, and then, build some skills in there and build some stuff and things, but try to be flexible and kind of adaptable as you go. So, yes, David. So yeah, it depends on where you're working. The tools are secondary, and yes, that core tool base is important. And again, the reason I'm really stressing this is that, I'll talk about this a little bit more, here in just in a minute, but when I teach my program, I'm teaching, a lot of the theory, and a lot of people come in and some students have come in and been unhappy even. And they've been unhappy because they just wanted they wanted me to just teach them Unreal, and they just wanted to be building a game day one. And literally they're frustrated because they want to be building levels by the first week, the second week of the class. And I'm like, you're not ready. You gotta, you're a baby. Like, you don't even know how to crawl. You don't even know how to walk, let alone standing up and running, and jumping hurdles, and stuff, right? And you got to learn those foundations. And so I really am trying to stress this to everybody, in that there's this need sometimes that we want to try to build and build and build, but what are we building, right? And how are we going to build it? Like, that can be just as important, right? So now the other thing to remember is that when it comes to, the game engine specifically, right, is that, right now in the current marketplace, yeah, I wish it was the program, Megan. When it comes to the marketplace, in the current market, you got very roughly 30% of the market using Unreal, 30% of the market using in Unity. About 30% of the market has its own custom proprietary technologies. So if you go to Naughty Dog or Insomniac or Sony, Microsoft on some of their teams, many different teams use their own technologies, their own game engines. They don't use Unreal. They don't use Unity, right? And each of those can work drastically different. Like some of them are just night and day, like not even close to each other, right? And then there's that last 10%, which is roughly a lot of other, what I'd call commercial game engines, like Amazon Lumberyard or Crytek, the CryEngine, which Lumberyard was based off of, or lots and lots of other, game engines are out there, and they do have a place. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with any of these engines. Every game has a different need. Every team has a different skill set. Each of these has different costs. Each of these has pluses and minuses, right? And so for you as a student, if you're just trying to learn, it can make it really, really hard. And so for me as a teacher, I struggle with this every day. I honestly, this has been a point of discussion that me and my fellow mentors have daily about which of these do we teach, because we started off teaching a lot of Unity, and so in our first few semesters we were predominantly focused on Unity. We also had some stuff that we're teaching some other proprietary engines like the Far Cry engine. We have some assignments that let you learn some other third-party modding and stuff, and some other tools, so that you got some examples of some other game engines. And again, just kind of seeing these differences is really eye-opening. And now we're later on in the course, we're bringing on a lot of Unreal learning. But, some of my students that went through that first part right now, they got really good at learning Unity. And a few of the guys already went off to try to get their first internships. And inevitably, the internship was using Unreal. And so it's like, and sometimes I feel like a failure because I'm trying to make sure that the students and everybody are prepared. But the point is, it's impossible to prepare for everything, right? And so by getting kind of a broad understanding of things, and and having a little bit of experience in Unreal, a little bit in Unity, a little bit in some proprietary stuff, is kind of that first foundation, right? And then if you have more time and you have more, whatever, then become a master at one of those, right? But I think it's dangerous if you go off and just want to become like the master of Unreal. You might get your first job in Unity, and then you're stuck, and you're gonna have to relearn. But that's part of the job, and so for some teams, they know that you're gonna have to crash course. You may get a job and then realize, like, man, for the next month, like, I may have to crash course and work nights and weekends just getting up to speed on this game engine, whether it's a proprietary engine or not. And so, like, even with Unreal, like, I knew that it was when I was working professionally in Unreal, like, a lot of my game teams, I knew that when I hired somebody who didn't have Unreal experience, it was probably a good 2 months, sometimes 3, before they were actually able to do real production work. And it just took that long for them to really get up to speed on the Unreal Engine, even if they knew a different engine. And so that kind of came with part of the job. But in the same hand, to try to find a really good engineer or a good designer or somebody who's really good at that craft, but also knows your technology or knows your engine, like, that just like limits your pool of resources so small that ultimately then you don't find like a good game designer. You're like, I'm trying to find a good game designer who knows, who's an expert in Unreal, and it just halves my market or quarters my market in available candidates. And so sometimes as a hiring manager, I'm really looking for your base core skills. Are you a great game designer first? And then I'll worry about, like, do you know the engine and the technology? And I'll maybe probe to see, can you learn this quickly? But I don't necessarily expect you to come in and be the absolute master of that. Now, some do. Again, some companies will expect that. But just be aware that each engine's a little different. And so if you're going towards being maybe more of an indie, you might want to spend a little bit more time on Unity. If you really have a dream of being in big AAA games, and working on really big PC console titles, then you're going to probably want to learn Unreal. But again, having a base and a foundation in both is kind of your safest bet, in my opinion, to learn how to, to get a job. And so that's where you have to be careful here is, just becoming a master of this tool is not going to get you a job. Being a great game designer is going to get you a job first and foremost. So just be careful here, because I see people over and over and over and over making the same mistake, that they think it's about the tool. They think it's just about learning Unity, and that's what's going to make you a great game designer, and it's not. It's about being a great game designer first and learning that tool second. So, David, been in school after a few days of game design theory. They skipped to developing on Unity. Exactly. Don't like this approach. I can't learn, yes, you can learn Unity exactly on your own. It's a lot harder to learn game theory, and it's a lot harder to learn how to be a great game designer. And like I said, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Udemy, you can go to a million sites and find a million halfway decent tutorials on Unity, Unreal, things like that, right? But just learn to be a great game designer. It's hard, but the schools don't quite seem to understand that, and that's been a struggle and something I've faced for many years when I was trying to hire people. And so I agree, it's tricky. And that's where, so no matter where you're studying, how you're studying, who you're studying with, just be aware that a tool is a tool, right? And whether you're a carpenter and you're learning, how to use a hammer or a saw or a screwdriver, right? Every job's got a slightly different tool, right? And you got to kind of learn some basics of those, and then you got to have enough knowledge to go like, well, in this particular case, I need a hammer, right? And I may not be a master at a hammer right now, and I'm kind of looking at this. I'm probably going to have some black and blue fingers, as I'm smashing my fingers with this hammer for the first few weeks. But eventually I'm going to learn, and I'm going to stop smashing my fingers, right? Because I'm going to get better at using that hammer, and stuff. And so that's my philosophy. That's my approach. And again, I know lots of people that will disagree, and I do know lots of teachers there. But, years, I've seen a lot of these cycles come and go. All these things that we think are new, there's nothing new about it. Like the stuff that we're seeing when we go from PS1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and and stuff. A platform is a platform is a platform. Whether we're whether in the old days we were drawing something at 640, 480, or now if we're designing something at 4K, it's more pixels, it's more dense, it's whatever, but it's still a display screen. Whether it's in VR on my head, or whether it's on my mobile phone, or whether it's up on my big screen TV or my monitor on my computer, it's just a display screen. How and what I use that for is what me as a designer needs to do, and how I create the content appropriate for that is, again, just a tool, right? And so it's going to keep changing, and it's going to change. We're at 4K today, but they're already talking that 4K is going to be obsolete, and we're jumping to 8K here, and it's a never-ending cycle, right? It's never going to end. So if you don't know how to adapt and don't know how to learn, what's the point, right? So Megan, yeah, it seems to be constantly evolving. Yep, and that's just, yes, I agree. It's technology, right? And that's just what's going to be part of our challenges in being in a really fast-paced, technology-driven thing. And so what I'm trying to get you guys to understand, and I know I'm beating you over the head a little bit with the hammer today of literally of like why this is important, but it's about building that foundation. And then just knowing that you're going to keep learning. You're going to keep, trying to get that new tool, the new technologies, the new techniques, the new genres, or whatever it is. And that you're just going to have to know that you're going to have to put in the work, and you're going to put in that effort. I've been doing this 30 years, and I still feel like I got to learn every day. I still have to keep challenging myself to figure out new things and new techniques and new pipelines and processes and all that kind of stuff, because it's just constantly something new there. And then one of our problems, that we have, as an industry is that we just have no standards. And I wish there was a way that we could have standards. If you look at the movie industry, for example, we got cameras, and granted, there's a few different cameras, and and what if I'm shooting in 4K versus 2K, or if I'm shooting whatever, yeah, there's some slight differences, right? But really, like, that industry standardized, the pipelines, the processes, the procedures. The film industry has realized that it's not about the idea. It's not about the technique of how I do it. Or sorry, it is all about the idea, and it's not about the technique and which camera I'm using and that kind of stuff. Yes, that there's a bit of craft in there, but as an example, many years ago, all of the tools and techniques that all the big computer graphics effects houses used to use. So when we talk about ILM and Pixar and all the top effects companies, they used to all have their own proprietary stuff. And there actually came a point where they all started sharing. They all shared their technology. They shared their tools. They shared a lot of stuff. Because one, every time they wanted to hire somebody, they didn't want to have to retrain them. And they got tired of retraining people over and over and over again. And they got tired of just, all the having to redevelop a tool, every time, something changed and they needed it. And in the end, they realized that in the end, making that movie and having that great story and that storytelling techniques and stuff, that was what mattered, right? They stopped fighting amongst themselves, and they created a craft that created an industry. The game industries, it's not that easy, right? We are more technology driven. Our technology does give us advantages and disadvantages, but so we don't like to share. Now, Unity and Unreal especially have been bringing us closer together, right? But we still all are very proud of our own customization, custom things. And it makes it really hard, though, is we just can't go from job to job to job, and not without a massive amount of relearning, and there's just so many different engines and processes and pipelines and how we go from start to finish just drastically, different, is different. Even just documentation, like, I've been at companies that, like EA and stuff like that have massive, amounts of documentation that they require. They've learned that process and the documentation process that goes into these things is absolutely, critical, to their success, because, they've learned that, the bigger the team is, you need to have more process, because, when you've got hundreds of people, you need to keep them going in the right direction, right? But I've also worked with like indie teams that just like refuse to document anything. They just want to build, and they won't write a GDD. They won't write design specs. They don't do things. They just build it. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It works for them. But then, but you could have, and be an indie designer for a very long time, and then go try to get a job at another company, and that company needs a lot of documentation. And so now what do you do? Like you have no experience in, in even knowing how to document. And so again, even like with my program, my philosophy of what I do is I teach you how to document. I teach you process. I teach you what, the EAs, the Ubisofts, the Microsofts, the big AAA studios, how they want it, how they like it. And once you learn how to write, a full GDD and a full spec and something that's really big, then it's really easy then to say like, well, I'm experienced enough now. I know how to do it. So I can now, instead of writing a 500-page GDD, I could write, a 5, something along that lines, and so you need to be aware of that. There's no right or wrong answers necessarily here. There might be better or worse ways depending on your team, your process. But again, you may not have that choice. You are often going to be told what to do. You're going to be told, hey, this is how detailed of a spec we want. And some teams want a lot of freedom in their documentation. For example, I've worked with teams, where their previous designers just kind of gave them a really rough spec, and they would just say like, yeah, like, we need a gun, and we need some units, and we need some stuff, and here, programmers, go build this, right? And then I came in on the team. The programmers are just looking at me like, please help us. Like, can somebody actually design this shit so we don't have to like do it ourselves? And like engineers don't want to design. Well, some do. Okay. A few of them do. But most engineers, they just want to implement. They want to build something, and like they get frustrated because the designers just give them like, yeah, just go build something. And they're guessing right now. They're doing your job as a game designer, and they get really frustrated. And so I came into some of those teams with very detailed, very like, here's the numbers to use. Here's the specifications to use. Here's the formulas to use. Here's the stuff you need to do. And here's, what you need to implement. And they were just like, oh my God, thank you. Like, this is so great and so amazing. Cause like now we can just code and we don't have to design. Right. And so you have to be aware of what does your team need? You as a game designer, you have two, people that you're trying to kind of serve. The first is your team, right? And you need to design what and how your team needs, but you also need to be designing something of what your consumer is going to want to play, right? But there's this double standard there that your team is really your client, your team is your user, right? And and so even that documentation and prototyping stuff is critical to know. But you got to know what your team needs and what your company needs, and so I can teach you a lot. But in the same hand, you gotta know how to think. You gotta know how to like apply that right into something that's going to make sense to your team and that they're going to actually use. And so if you go write a 500-page GDD and you've got a team that's against documentation, that's literally going in the circular file bin, and they literally won't even read it. And I've just seen that happen over and over and over again, where somebody does an incredible spec, but nobody read it because it was too long. Right. And so you need to be able to, again, just in the same way of knowing a tool, documentation and process and prototyping. And these things are all tools, right? They're all things that you've got to use your common sense. You've got to have discussions with your team and your teammates and stuff to understand what do you guys need. And then know enough and be savvy enough, and then hopefully over time get some experience to know how to then apply that and to design what you need to design, right? For that time and for that place, for that team, for that project, right? And figure it out. But if you get stuck in a rut and you're like, this is the way I work and I always do it this way, you're going to fail, right? And so all of this is about learning to be smart, learning the foundations and learning how to adapt for everything you do. And don't even assume that when you start a project that if you start in one process or one set of tools or one pipeline or whatever, that you're going to stick with that 100% until it's done. I've seen teams shift and go. I've seen them change engines halfway through. I've seen them change their tools. I've seen their pipelines change, the processes change, because they'll realize it's not working and they'll shift again, right? So you'll be flexible, right? That's what you need to learn as a student. Learn these things about how to adapt and learn how to think, right? And that's such a critical skill to do. But if you get so dependent on that this one thing you're learning is going to be what your whole job is for the rest of your life, it's not going to happen, right? Go flip burgers or something. That technology is not going to change. But as a game designer, it changes by the hour. Trust me. So yes, Megan, building the foundation is definitely key. Hey, Rushback, thanks for joining. How are you doing today? So, the standards, in lack of standards, is definitely, a huge issue for us within the industry. And so when you're thinking about studying game design and you're not quite sure what to do or where to go, some of the things to just kind of look out for and be careful about is, again, what's the source material coming from? And I don't care whether you're going to an online school, going to a physical school, if you're reading a book, to watching a video, whatever that source material is. But who's the author? Who's trying to teach you right now? What do they really truly know, right? And what experience do they have? Have they worked on a game before? I mean, I've evaluated dozens and dozens and dozens of game design programs, from online ones to big 4-year universities that are Ivy League, and I can't tell you like how many times. I'm not saying that's everybody, but a significant number of the professors and the people teaching have no experience. Like, they've never worked on a game. They've never actually shipped a real game. They might have done some little indie project and they did something. They shipped on a mobile thing that nobody ever saw that wasn't a real project. They never worked on a real team. They don't have years of production, or some of them worked in production 20 years ago, and they haven't worked on anything current. And stuff like that. So be careful of your source material. In game design especially, I do find that there's just a lot of bad advice out there. And so just question that a little bit. If something seems a little off or somebody's, teaching you a certain way, use your head again. Think about it, and question, is that really the right way for me right now? Does that sound right? Is that the, is that where they're, what they're doing? So yeah. I'm not naming names on schools and talking specifically, about some schools, but I've lectured at a lot of schools. I've worked with a lot of schools, and there's definitely, a lot of that stuff out there where they try to sell you on this great, incredible program, but then, the people that developed it or the curriculum or whatever just doesn't quite work, and it's not practical. It's not going to get you a job. It's going to get you this degree and this piece of paper, but it's not going to help you make a real game on a real team with a real project, and that kind of stuff. And so just be careful wherever you're going to go. Question who's teaching you. Question what they know, and stuff, and just be careful. And the curriculum, in a lot of schools is very, very, very academic. And I cringe. There's a time and a place for theory. There's a time and a place where, in game design especially, you can go down some major rabbit holes when it comes to like the theory of game design, right? And how game design, can just get into these like, well, the avatar of this and and all these kinds of things, and he's the player's thinking through all this stuff, and you get into these like highfalutin psychological storytelling, kinds of things, and and stuff. And in the end, it's like, is that fun? Like, is that what the player really like is thinking? And I'll read some of these design specs sometimes, and you're like, God, like we don't. That's not the way we really make a game, right? I mean, that's the way an academic writes a research report, But that's not how we design a GDD or write a real game, right? Well, that's not what a consumer truly wants. So you do have to be careful about that, and that some of these schools teach a lot of really highfalutin theory on stuff because that's what their professors are really like, what they really are about. They don't know how to make a practical game and stuff. And so be careful about that and question that. Like another example related to this was like art schools. I saw a lot of, over my years, I've seen a lot of portfolios coming from artists, and some of them just does incredible work, but they're all very artsy and they're butterflies and there's like all these kind of fun things and they're really cute and you can tell that they're a decent artist, but there's not a single piece of art in their portfolio that was like, military or science fiction or fantasy or anything related to a game at all, and it had no practical application. And I just had a hard time hiring them because I'm like, yeah, I can tell like you did some like nice artsy work, but it didn't apply to what I need you to do. And I don't know if I can trust you to go out and make a giant dinosaur with guns on its back because that's what I need, right? I don't need you to draw me butterflies. So even in your portfolio and how you put together that portfolio, whether you're a game designer, an artist, or whatever, understand who's going to look at that stuff and build what they want to see. Build what's going to show off your skills for what you want to do, what your dream is, for what you believe in. But be careful about that, is because, again, like a lot of these art schools will have you go off and they'll have you do the 3D modeling, and then they'll have you do the game design, and then they'll have you do the programming. They'll have you build this whole thing yourself, and then you can show that off and say like, hey, I built this whole thing. And I'm like, and me as a hiring manager, I look at it and go like, I don't care, because I don't need you to do that whole thing. I need you to make the best level that's ever been built in the entire history of the world. Like, I don't care if you programmed it, did the art and all that other stuff. I just need you to do this, right? And so that's the way most hiring managers are thinking. And so when you try to do, again, all of it, like, yeah, it's okay. And if you want to go be an indie, that's fine. But they're not teaching you to be a real game designer, right? And stuff. And so, and then a lot of these schools don't have great mentoring, and they don't have, they've got big classes. It's a typical university problem, right? You got big classes with lots of people, and you don't get one-on-one time, with your professors and things like that. So that's just something you just need to be aware of. Yeah, Megan, it is hurting cats. That's for sure. So yeah, David, to answer your question, right now at CG Spectrum, we don't have scholarships, in the US, and, I believe we do in Australia. We're based out of Australia. We are working on some stuff, to get scholarships, at CG Spectrum here really soon. So, hopefully, sometime in the months or year, or this next year to come, for sure, we'll definitely, we are working very, very hard towards getting accreditation within the U.S. and to be able to get the scholarship. So sorry about that right now. I know it's kind of expensive and it's hard to do, but we are working on that. But I'm not sure how imminent exactly that is. It's it's something we've been working really hard this year to happen. COVID came along and kind of messed up the world, so some of our stuff that we had coming down the pipe, got put on hold. So apologies for that. So, in the end, there's a lot of opportunities in game design. But you need to really kind of figure out, what the, job is that you really want to do. Foxhound Oz, we have, some partner schools. You can message me offline, and I can make some introductions. But we have Call Arts and a couple schools in Australia that we're currently partnered with and providing partnerships with them. And I believe you can get scholarships and stuff through them. I believe there's a couple like in the Sydney area, and I know that we just signed a couple new deals there as well. So if you're not sure, PM me or go on to our website and send a general info thing. But like I said, we in Australia we do have some stuff that's accredited and does, I believe, has some scholarship stuff if you're in Australia. So, and judging by your name, Foxhound, you probably are in Australia. So but yeah, we're based out of Melbourne in Australia. So so anyway, so getting these jobs, it's, again, you got to learn the basics. You got to get the basics, whether that's on your own or at a school, and you just got to keep learning. But the most important thing you got to build is your portfolio. And we don't have time today to jump into the full. We don't have the full thing, time today to talk about your portfolios and how important those are. At some point, maybe next week we can get into it, and we'll do a class on how to build a great portfolio for a game designer, because that's its own topic. But keep in mind that everything you need to be doing really is working towards building that portfolio out, right? And just be aware too that I want to mention that we call these, right now we're talking about game design jobs, right? And we're using the word game design. But keep in mind that the skill sets that you learn as a game designer are actually becoming more and more and more practically applicable into many other areas and other types of jobs. Whether those are serious games, location-based entertainment stuff, theme parks, different types of simulations. A lot of AR, VR type stuff, training, enterprise things. A lot of these people are hiring game designers, and in a lot of different ways, whether we're using, whether they're doing military type stuff or gamification or all that kind of stuff. So the skill sets that you're building as a game designer, the degree and the stuff that you're studying as a game designer is actually pretty broad. And there is a lot of applicability into these other areas. So I just want to make sure you understand that and make sure that as you're studying, that stuff is very applicable. However, be careful, because again, like I've seen a lot of schools, like I've seen schools that were teaching, like I saw a class the other day at a school. It was like writing for virtual worlds, as part of their curriculum. And I was like, I mean, it doesn't hurt to know that. Like, it doesn't hurt to know how to write for a virtual world. But when you only have one class on game system design, and then you had like 10 other classes on making serious games and writing for virtual worlds and like all these other things that were like tertiary at best, like if you don't know that core, if you're not a master of that core of being a game designer, the rest of this doesn't matter, right? So again, being a great game designer will still help you go get these jobs, right? And then each one of these jobs might have a slightly different application, a slightly different thing. And this is no different than learning a new genre of game, right? Going out and building an RTS or something that isn't all that different than building a simulation, right? A simulation, like a military simulation, just maybe needs to be more precise. It may need to be, more exact in what it's doing, right? Building something in VR, on a motion simulator ride, again, isn't too different than building a video game that has, like a rumble in your controller. Like you're sending commands that send some motion and some stuff. And yeah, there's some slightly different rules. Like how is that simulator going to move me? How am I, rocking back and forth? And how do I feel the motion? Like that's just, again, another set of technology that whether I'm learning how to develop for VR or whether I'm learning, how to develop for a motion platform or whatever, each one of those things just has a slightly new set of rules, a new set of technologies that you have to learn. So just be kind of aware of that. I'm not going to get into this, too much, but just, you can see that there's lots of different, within the U.S. here, there's a lot of different stuff. This one that you can't see, that's this third one down, is the game designers, and you can kind of get some sense for how salaries, go up. Again, this is just average within the U.S. of, and then the bottom one is producers that my face is covering. So again, being a game designer can be a great job. But you can see that, that there's a lot of schools, there's lots of choices. But again, as you guys are probably learning or finding or knowing, it's tricky because there's just so much to try to figure out. As this is saying, there's over 400 different programs just in the U.S. alone. There's over 500 companies just in California. And again, every one of those is probably different, right? And stuff. So again, it's a great job, but you just got to be aware of that stuff. And so just to reiterate, we talked about this a little bit too much early on. So because we're running short of time, I'm not going to jump into this very much. But again, we're not focusing, for myself too much on tools, because the stuff that you can learn on your own and having you learning the tools through your assignments in my course is how I teach you. And so I get you to learn by doing, but I don't spend a lot of time myself here on camera, teaching you how to use Unity myself, because again, there's a lot of other resources there. My skill, my knowledge, my expertise is in teaching you how to make something fun. That's what you're coming to me for. Me teaching you how to do Unity like everybody else can it doesn't solve any problems. And so let me plug myself in the program just a little bit, and sorry for this again, but I think it's important that, you get just a little bit of a sense for us, but, our program is very geared towards AAA. We're in more PC console stuff. We do spend like 5-6 weeks on mobile design and some other stuff. So we do cover some other things that are not AAA and not, but again, if you learn about the right way to do it, all of this is applicable in the indie and to smaller stuff. But I don't believe that if you learn indie that you can scale up to AAA. It's a lot harder to go this way than it is to go down, right? And in fact, I have several students that actually worked in and for 1 to 2 years in mobile game design at small indies. They then went and tried to get jobs in AAA because that was their dream, to go work at Ubisoft or some really great studio. And they tried and tried. They couldn't get in. And then ultimately they came back and they're taking my course now in order to learn how to actually make AAA games at a big studio. Because they actually, even with several years of working knowledge and experience in indie mobile games, it didn't apply. And they weren't able to actually get a job. So just be careful of that and understand there's some differences there in going big versus small. Again, learning to think helps, but if you start really small and you just kind of, again, learn Unity and you learn how to build some stuff and you can build some silly little games, that's not teaching you the processes and pipelines and the big picture of how to really make something big and huge. And again, my program focuses on teaching you game design, right? I don't teach you art, I don't teach you programming, but I teach you just enough that you can learn the language. So in other words, I'll teach you like art pipelines so you understand how art is made, but we'll spend an hour on that, not weeks and months, right? We'll teach you a little bit of like the programming and the ideas behind and the concepts behind those things, but we spend a few hours on that, not, weeks and months. So it's really giving you enough knowledge to understand things, to understand the pipelines, but without having to make you an expert as an artist or a programmer. My program's all about being a game designer, right? And specifically, we focus on game system design and game level design, so that you can go out and get a job in both of those categories. And I also believe that game system design and level design are very, very, very interrelated and tightly woven. That that those are important to learn together. But I also, I'm not. While we cover things like world building and stuff that's applicable to being a creative director, realize as a student, you're never going to get a job as a creative director. You're never going to get my job, right? I've spent 20 years learning my craft. You're not going to get my job. Maybe at a small team, if you start your own company, you can. But in most people's cases, you're not going to go off and get that job. So I'm trying to get you a job, right? My program is it's like a trade school, right? It's different. We're all about getting you that job, not about just teaching you a bunch of theory and then, getting you a degree and then, hey, good luck, bye. This is all very, very focused on stuff. And so my stuff is really about building your portfolio out and learning how to build stuff and getting you to build stuff, that's going to be about those things, that you need to know, so that you can actually get that job. And then, and you have a wide variety of lessons and stuff, which we'll talk about, in a second here. And so my program, is again, knowing what to learn. It's giving you lots of advice. things like that you're just not going to get if you try to do this on your own, right? Most people that try to do this on their own, they just go all over the place. They're like, ooh, let's try this and let's do this and let's learn that, and then in the end, they don't really know how to put it all together and how to make it great, right? And you can go take a 12-week course at Udemy to learn, Unity, but again, it's not like they're not teaching you game design, right? They're not teaching you this and that and stuff. And so it's really hard when you're on your own to figure out what to learn, right? And then you don't know what to focus on. You go down these rabbit holes all the time and stuff. But that being said, there's lots of great classes out there. There's lots of great stuff. Like Will Wright's got a master class that's amazing. Like I've watched it several times. Like it's great. There's lots of good stuff from the GDC on YouTube or the GDC Vault. There's some okay books out there and stuff. There's lots of, like the Book of Lenses by Jesse Schell, stuff like that. There is good material out there, but keep in mind, again, it gets outdated pretty fast, right? And so you may look at a video and be like, hey, that looks awesome. And, and it could be 2 years old and already out of date. So just, be careful about that kind of stuff. So David, so system and level design are really the two main topics that I cover. Now we do talk about, some narrative, some sound, and we talk about multiplayer. We talk about, mobile, free to play, different types of using data, and all that kind of stuff, in my course. But again, it's enough for you to kind of understand the basics, but it's not about like making your own sounds and those kind of things or getting really, really deep into those things. It's really about, most of your jobs as entry-level jobs are going to be in systems or level design. And so that's really why the course focuses there. And again, you'll be using, like narrative, and you'll be using, some stuff, but I can't make you, in my initial program, which is 10 months, I can't make you a writer, right? So I can give you some basics on like ideas for how to write interactive fiction, and we cover some stuff like that, but it's not a hardcore course in like interactive fiction, writing, stuff like that. We plan to develop that actually. That's something on my to-do list in the years to come, but that's literally its own course, and so that's why we kind of give you some basics there, and we help you build it. But again, there's just some of these topics are literally, we can't, if we were a 4-year college, and you're taking a 4-year program, we could get much deeper into topics like those. But, there's only so much we can do in that first year, right? So if you're not looking for a job, and, if you have your own studio and preparing for your first game, again, it's that same thing. You need to figure out like that process that works for you, the pipeline that works for you. What skills and what things do you need to know in order to get success? And so you might be off trying to say pitch to a publisher. You might be off trying to pitch to a investor to try to figure out how to get money, right? And so you might be trying to figure out like how do we just make something really fun? How do we sell that? So at every stage, it's a little bit different, right? Each company is going to be a different thing. Each game is going to be at a slightly different place in a different way, and so that's why there. And if if you're if you're you're talking about being, if you're your own publisher, as well, again, like if you're self-publishing and self-building, and then really it's just about, how do you make the fun game, right? What do the consumers want, right? And so then it's really just about, in your particular area, your particular game, your particular genre, like what is it that consumers really want? What's popular? What's not? What are the mechanics needed? And unfortunately, in the next 5 minutes, I can't cover all of that. Happy to have a side conversation on that, or if you watch some of my other videos, there is some stuff about how to approach game design, right, and how to approach learning how to be a great game designer, and the tools and techniques needed for that is really in the end about understanding your users, understanding their needs, and trying to figure out what's right for them. We don't have at the moment we have the ability, like CGS, we help students find jobs and things like that, but we don't have like a publishing group or anything like that. That like actually helps you go out and like create your own game and publish it. We've talked about doing some stuff like that. We do have Maxine, who's a new hire for us, whose job is to help students find jobs and things like that. But we don't necessarily have that help. Now, that being said, if you take my course, and if you have a mentor, whether it's myself or somebody else, you get 1 hour per week with us. And so I actually have some guys who are actually maybe like yourself, where they're trying to build their own games. And actually, I spend most of the time with them actually reviewing their design decks and helping them understand their games, and helping them stuff. They don't need as much help necessarily in the theory. They actually want me to literally help them with their particular game that they're designing at that moment, that they're actually going to build and release. And so indirectly, sometimes we do, at least within the game design course, we do try to help people that are kind of in that middle ground where they're in production. So we do have a little bit of help there. And so, but it's a difficult problem to have. Real quick, because we just got a couple minutes here left, just to give you an idea of what one of my classes is like each week. You get 3 to 6 hours of video of me jabbering on and on and on and on like this, for better or for worse, staring at my ugly face. And that's about 3 to 6 hours a week. You get 1 hour a week of mentoring, either one-on-one or in a class. And again, that's invaluable. Like to have, a 1 hour talk every week with me for so many people is just, again, whether I'm helping you with a specific game or a specific problem or whatever, that's not anything you're going to get at a big university. You're not going to have an industry expert that can help you for an hour every week, talk about your problems, right? I can give you career advice or whatever those are. So that's just that. Our one-on-one mentoring is a huge part of our program. And then there's about 15 hours a week of different assignments, and building your portfolio and learning your tools. And we have a lot of things. Some of our assignments are kind of random one-offs, like teaching you how to communicate. Like it's not related directly to game design, but I really reinforce like communication skills, because, great communication skills are makes or breaks you as a game designer, in my opinion. And so we have some assignments to do that. We have some assignments to teach you, a little bit of board game, a little bit of card game design, and some other types of stuff. We don't go deep into that, but we do have some kind of one-offs there that are just kind of great skill building to have. And then some of them reinforce, what you're learning that week too. But in the end, it all comes back to building your portfolio and building that stuff that's going to get you a job. And that's where we tend to focus. And so I'm not going to go into the depths of what our terms are, because we just have a couple minutes left. I shared out earlier the link, to this if you guys want. And the same information is up on our website. But basically we have, 3 core terms that we have that kind of go through all sorts of different stuff, within it. And then we're just now adding a 4th term, and that 4th term is going to be about, focused on learning the Unreal Engine 4. And we're creating a proprietary framework that you will not need to know any art or any programming, but you're going to be able to have basically install UE4, copy over this project file, and it's going to have dozens of different plugins and everything you're going to be able to need to go from concept to finished, to build levels, put in AI enemies, set up combat, build levels, the whole 9 yards. And so I don't want you to spend your time learning how to model, texture, animate, doing all those kinds of things. This framework will allow you to do everything from audio, visual effects, AI, the whole 9 yards. And you're going to be able to build entire games with this framework with no programming skills and no art skills. And so this is something that we're just now beginning to implement, that will be happening soon. Thanks, Megan. Take care, and thanks for joining us. And so, and then, there's lots and lots of other stuff, again, you can learn, but it's just, you have to decide, what it is, that interests you, right? Because some people have skills as a designer only, and meaning that they're great at knowing fun. Some people have good art skills or at least potential for that. Some are great at programming. Some are more interested in writing. Some are interested in other things. And so to be a great game designer, you also need to follow your passion, follow your heart, follow those things that you really love, and spend that extra time. Once you master being a game designer, spend that extra time to learn, and study and practice those things that you really enjoy and get better at those as well, because all skills help. But again, if you try to be that jack of all trades from day one, you're going to fail. And I just can't stress that enough. It's just really hard. So just encourage you guys, follow your heart, follow your dreams, but be practical about it, and find those things that you really believe in and you want to do, because if you're passionate about it, you're going to do way better at it. So, yeah, David, I hope someday you can join us. We'd love to have you. And for everybody else, again, sorry, this has been kind of a crash course today. I've been moving fast. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I'm trying to stress some subjects so you guys really take it to heart, just about the challenges of learning game design. And it's really, really hard. There's no easy answers there. But, and I'm trying, I tried hard not to say my program's the only program, right? There's lots of good and bad out there. But however you choose to learn, just again, focus on the fundamentals, focus on that core of it, focus on just how to be a great game designer, right? And then, and then follow your passions, follow your heart, and if you get stuck, reach out, find some help, and stuff. But I wish everybody the best of luck. And wish everybody a safe week. And if you guys want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Again, if you just look me up, I'll put just my name again here. It's but it should be in there. If you so you find me on LinkedIn, connect there. Stay in touch. You can find my I think I'm LinkedIn / Troy Dunaway, I believe, is just my LinkedIn URL. Actually, I can look it up here real quick. And feel free to connect with me, on there. And, or I guess it's T Dunaway. So there's my LinkedIn there. You can reach me there, anytime. And then I believe it's, and there's my CG Spectrum email. So keep in touch, everybody. Wish you all the best of luck, and, again, don't give up, keep going at it. It's learning to be a game designer is hard, but you can do it, right? And believe in yourself, and just take it one day at a time, and you got this. So, again, thank you all for joining, and have a great week, and we will see you all hopefully next week. Take care now.